Hi everyone, I'm Airier, and today we're going to look at Fan with Too Much Time, Star Wars with Warhammer 40K, Episode 24, Beyond Axum. If this isn't just a title that's a red herring and we're actually still back on Axum, we're just like looking at space instead. If we're actually moving on to the entire galaxy around the entire setting we've been focusing on, I am looking forward to this because seeing all the ripples coming off, seeing what else is going on, all the other players, what actions they're taking, finding out what the other factions of Space Marines are doing outside of the one planet where the Guardian Force, barely a skeleton crew, is admittedly holding off the vast majority of the Empire. Sorry, no, wait, they're still the Republic right now. Sorry, when it comes to Palpatine, I get that so confused. That's actually a very good excuse, even though I was bullshitting. Whatever. All aside, I'm really looking forward to this because I like seeing all the ripple effects. Unless this is just leading into further ripples and they're not going to clash yet. I don't know which way Fan can go. He could go on either one, depending on how he decides to approach this, and I really want to find out. Otherwise, you guys don't know. There's a link below, original video. Hit it up. Let's get started. Well. Okay, we're back
Heresy.
to these guys.
It looked like heresy. That reason alone was enough to build the bile in the back of Orion's throat.
Okay.
The Skywatch were proud, pure.
I know they're the Skywatch. I'm still going to call them Blue Team. Partially because it amused me, and partially because my memory shit I will forget again.
Sons of Guilliman, but they were not perfect. Their gene father, honored before all but the Emperor himself, had not been perfect.
Heresy.
Either by flaw of planning or translation,
Chimeras
the
or
Codex
something else?
Astartes had failed Orion, and his chapter had left them in ruin. So they had adapted, changed, and at times deviated from what his brothers in other chapters would call the right path.
I'm pretty sure when he talks about deviation, it's how involved they specifically were, according to Fan's lore and what he's actually put in the story itself, from what little I've seen about his lore outside of the story. Them being so involved is like Ultramarines on steroids. And considering Ultramarines actually manage worlds, that should say something. But if that's not what he's referring to, that could be weird, especially considering this starts with him reminiscing on heresy. Is it something he discovered, or is it something about his allies that we aren't privy to yet? I could go either way, and I'm actually very curious.
In all of these changes, he was more than complicit, even if he did not originally enact them. But he would stand by them, all of them, each and every deviation, even before the judgment of his own Primarch. But of all of the deviations they had embraced, this one surely was the one he feared the most.
Oh. Okay, now that's the thing. It's not his allies, it's him. It's his group. It's the Skywatch committing what he thinks might be heresy. Oh. Now that adds a very interesting layer to this, because usually anyone dealing with anything that's even somewhat loyal, the shout of heresy is followed by lots and lots of not aliving things. Whether it's justified or not, you really can't take the chance against the warp. Here, though, the fact that he's actually thinking it's even heresy adjacent would be damning. The fact that he thinks it might be, and that's what they're looking at right now, is it his act? No, it's not the actions he put in place, but they're taking it further. Is he talking about how he more or less took over as himself the leader of the entire 40K faction? More or less, despite the multiple divisions that obviously will undermine it because it's 40K. That's just what they do. Oh. Could be something else.
The chapter master of the Skywatch resented the very aesthetic of the Librarius, if it could even be called that any longer.
Okay, we're going psyker heavy?
The old Marine was always made profoundly uncomfortable each time he was forced to come here. And
smart
already,
move.
Despite not being within the walls of the Librarius proper,
psychers can
he
tear
could
apart
feel
Marines
the twitches and emotion-laden
right.
sensations which signaled the beginning of his undesired anxiety. Lodged deep within the center of the Herald of Justice was the Circle of Vigilance, the organization which had come to replace the standard function of their chapter's former reservoir of psychic learning. Orion was old.
This might just be something he's covered, specifically he being Fan, in outside context, but when he talks about the reserve of learning in the Circle, is that since they've come to the Star Wars dimension, or is that previous things prior to the story starting? It'll probably get covered, but that actually is a really interesting definition that I'm not sure of yet. I'm only focusing on it because that, the way Fan's introducing it, It almost is like it assumes we have knowledge of it, so maybe it's one of those moments where it has come up and I missed it, which, I mean, it's me. That's entirely possible. My memory is shit. On the other hand, it could be more of a case that this is something he put down in one of his outside of the story talks. But that's not usually a mistake he makes, so I'm not going to assume that. The reason I'm even highlighting this is because when it comes to information you get, how you get it, where you get it is very important. And sometimes trap writers fall into, and again, I'm going to re-clarify, I don't think this is what fans are doing, but what other writers have fallen into is they write things outside of the narrative, and it's very relevant inside of the narrative. So you have that disconnect when all you see is the narrative itself. You are missing significant parts of information that will inform the view. The writer is aware of it because it's in their head, and sometimes that's barely there, and that they've written it other places, so they know they wrote it somewhere. They just don't realize, oh, wait, I didn't write it here, though. It's a massive failing, and I get pissed when I see that. Even in admittedly good works, and I'm looking at you, Evangelion, where all the information is somewhere, just not where you want it. And technically, I know Evangelion is an anime and not, the story, but it's a story, but you know what I mean. The problem is just, it's that kind of, the information's out there. Now, Fan, he's really good about contextualizing and keeping track of where everything is. But maybe this is the one example where he doesn't do it. I don't personally think it is, but it does hit me at that when I first see this little example of an event that doesn't really seem to make sense, but seems to be important enough to focus on. And he's never really mentioned Psychers prior, unless I just forgot it. Still, though, we'll see which way it goes.
But not nearly old enough to play witness to those strange founding times, when the first chapter masters of his venerable order made the controversial decisions that led to this. The circle was not actually a single ring, but 10 interlocking rings, rooms, and passages designed for the...
And that does answer my question if I had just gone on a few seconds, I'm aware. That said, it feels like there's more information here. I mean, he's going to talk more about it. But I'm also not sure if the heresy is referring to is the circle or something else. I should probably just listen more.
Purpose
I'm getting excited.
Place. Within the outer 9 rings, no sign of anything one could call a librarius could be seen. Instead, layered and warded fortifications were presented.
Are they
the
trapped?
witch-warded warriors, the Space Marine Neo-Watchers of his chapter, stood guard here, holding their vigil over their considerable defenses. They wore a wholly different panoply, donning burnished red armors and thick silver robes, denoting them as what they were.
Oh, wow,
though most nodded their heads in his direction, and some even saluted his presence as he passed them, the chapter master of the Skywatch remained keenly aware of the fact that these were not his Marines. Not anymore.
Oh.
They belonged to Watchmaster Zarak, even if, ostensibly, the Watchmaster himself belonged to Orion.
Oh. Oh, now that's interesting. I mean, he talked about being deviant, but this is literally going well outside of most established norms and treats the librarius or a librarian order in general. It sounds like they're not actually librarians, and they're saying Watchmaster. Usually Watchmaster is the people watching. Have they cut the Psychers off so completely that they have their own internal order that is only somewhat behooved to the chapter master? You know, these guys are actually quite deviant. I thought they were, generic Ultramarines filler, just way more zealous about management. And technically, that is also completely right. It was management internally that was even more odd. I was not expecting that twist.
Despite this, the lack of direct authority over these warriors was not what he disliked most about the fortified outer rings of the structure.
Is that they have to have it, right?
No. Even if the Neo-Watchers acted as their own demi-chapter more often than he would like, even if their creation and maintenance put his entire chapter at risk of scrutiny and inquisitorial sanction,
which they probably
were,
already know,
if anything, the least troubling aspect of this entire arrangement.
What?
These men were loyal, powerful, and every one had worn the blue skin and gold eyes of the Skywatch before becoming a Neo-Watcher.
Neo-Watcher, a new Watcher. What happened to the old Watchers? That would be the obvious first question there. sorry, I love the music, and I can see why that religious tone, because this is a matter of religion. It's a matter of the warp. It's a matter of actual soul power. So having that overtone is both good because it has haunting, almost mystical qualities, but it's also slow and creepy, which is exactly the mood he's going for here. So Fan's doing a good job at establishing that mood. This, though, is really interesting because of what it's telling us. We're focusing off Axum, and the first thing we're doing is showing a deviation in what we thought was the goodest chapter available. Because we can get the red team, I know their name, I'm not going to say it, down pretty flat. They are zealots. They are in your face, aggressive. It's like a couple levels below a berserking Red Angel. I wouldn't go Black Death level, but just someone who's going like full blood for the Red Angel and then not questioning why that sounds like it could be awkward in any way, shape, or form. And yes, I realize that's an Angon reference. A lot of people don't. And sometimes it honestly is used to apply to Sanguinius as well, even though that's weird. Yeah. But more importantly, we know what they are up front. Their probable deviation is on their sleeves, but also they're so aware of it, and it's what they do. It's kind of not really a problem. They're just the in-your-face aggressive, fuck everything, burn it all to the ground chapter. And yeah, that works. Yeah, they're good at it. It's what they do. They're Marines. It's literally part of the job. It's probably very straightforward and good for that. Here, though, it's almost like a reverse change from how they were originally presented, especially Orion being the statesman. And his deviation, I thought, was going to be too much control. But this is because the first thing we see off Axum, because we've seen the other chapter so prominently, it's reframing things. Now, why we need to reframe them immediately as the very first act off Axum, that is actually the most important thing right now. What are they leading into? Is it just to cover them because we haven't been here before? Or is there some other aim for it? Now, for a lesser writer, some other aim for it would be, fine, we just need to go back here because we haven't seen them for a while, which is lazy. Because it doesn't actually move the plot forward. It doesn't move the characterization forward. It's just, hey, here's filler. As far as I've seen, Fan doesn't do filler content. There's some point to it. So right now, we're getting this and building up a darker side. Maybe not wrong. Maybe impressive. But it's going to put him at odds with whatever we're going to be seeing him paired up against as the enemy. But I don't know to what extent. It could be either to make him seem more sympathetic by showing how he's willing to go with something he thinks is wrong, but because of tradition and the necessity of it, he'll go for it. Or we're going to see him slowly be painted more as the villain of this arc, even if a well-meaning one, which is entirely a trope on its own right. Now, it's 40K on this side. They could all be villains. It's completely the thing. The only reason they're not is because everyone else on the 40K side is worse. Horribly worse. Just don't know which way Fan's going yet.
What truly made Orion's ancient hackles rise as he made his way deeper and deeper into the circle of vigilance was their weapons. Thrice blessed and sanctified by the ecclesiarchal hierophant of Mentessa Prime, bearing null blades, blank rounds, and even the vitally precious and always rare psych-out grenades. What bothered Orion was not the nature of the rare arsenal.
Anti-psychic weapons?
It was its orientation.
Inside.
With every choke point, hard point, pillbox, killing zone, and gun emplacement facing inward towards the final innermost ring where resided the true psychic resource of the chapter. The
resource? Singular? Is he referring to psychers as a group, or is there only one psyker? I'm not sure which would be weirder.
Warlock vigilance of the Skywatch. These details served as constant, if subtle, reminders of the unnatural nature of this arrangement, and how dangerous this particular deviancy from the Codex truly was.
Why?
And yet he
No, maybe I missed something.
These details served as constant, if subtle, reminders of the unnatural nature of this arrangement, and how dangerous this particular deviancy from the Codex truly was. And yet he tolerated it. For, while it was a terrible burden and risk on his chapter, it was also an undeniable strength, and one which had saved the Skywatch from certain failure on countless occasions. Throughout their many millennia of constant struggle and warfare,
What
the
did
different
they
masters
do?
of the chapter had chosen to utilize the Warlocks in a variety of ways. From more traditional combat roles, as anti-demonic strike forces, mind-eating interrogators, and more. Orion...
Warlock is a very important term because normally a librarian is heavily controlled. They don't go warlock, they're psychers. Warlock implies a level of malevolence, which in 40K, anything that seems malevolent to a space marine, considering, you know, their thing is literally to punch evil in the face and say, fuck you, I got a bigger bolter. And, you know, depending on the chapter, sometimes literally. Hell, you can admit a space wolf would say that. And probably way more crass things involving knives and whatever. But for malevolence ascribed from a space marine chapter master's perspective, to use the phrase warlock, that would imply that they're not codex compliant, not just in how they're setting it up, but in they're using flat out warp shit. Like not psychic level chained by the Emperor and all the binding rituals, not just a librarian. This is, are they doing daemon hosts? No, because that would be a different phrase for it. Are they essentially just doing psychic sorcerers? Or just chaos sorcerers working for them? Oh, geez, are they actually renegade? No.
Orion, however, preferred to use them for a different purpose.
Sport?
Intelligence.
Target practice?
With their eyes buried in the warp, they could find sight beyond sight, and had on many occasions gifted Orion with insights which lent him strategic guidance.
Prescience is powerful.
Large red and silver garbed devastators lumbered alongside him. Blessed heavy flamers presented forward.
But if he's using guidance from information taken from the warp, that is, it's safe up until it isn't, because Tzeentch is literally just looking at this going, well, now, you already got my colors down. Now you just need a few feathers. Yeah, it's a good thing their logo doesn't involve a bird. A blue bird. I'm sure that's just a coincidence.
And lit, as if they expected a sudden swarm of gene stealers to storm them the instant they opened.
I mean,
the chapter master
does happen
felt
every
a
now and again.
cold sweat sheen his forehead as he felt his grip over the large blade he held tighten with a soft sigh
actually
of
nervous.
servo muscles.
That is terrifying in its own right.
Orion had a frighteningly small amount of understanding as to why this place affected him so, and had
self-preservation,
1,000,001 rationalizations for the nervous reaction he constantly displayed when approaching the chapter's psychers. Yet not one satisfied him. The answer he had decided to settle upon, at least for now, was simply that this place was as wrong as it was undeniably necessary.
Whatever the hell they're building towards, this is going to be nasty. Like, he's saying he's using them, they have eyes in there, but are they there willingly because it's what they were told to do, and the deviation is just that they're being used in ways that are not natural? Or is this going to be some crazy Iron Warriors level, what the fuckery, we're just going to pretend this never came out levels? You know exactly what I'm talking about, and if you don't, we're not going to bring up the Daemon Colobula. That, just fuck that thing. Maybe not the right choice of words, but if you know what I mean, let's just move on. And if you don't look it up.
The entryway before him was large, both wide and tall enough for two dreadnoughts to walk side by side and still have room to spare. They were composed of ancient silver and electrum stained with age and strife, and cloaked in an almost invisible sheath of pale, bristling mist. Orion filled his lungs with a subtle breath, not looking away from the doors or the high Gothic script engraved into them. He nodded without veering his eyes, and the doors creaked in response. The servos and mechanisms which held them shut began to relax before tensing again as they pulled in the opposite direction, beginning the process of opening the towering silver gates.
Oh?
Pale, hoary frost swiftly crawled out and across the doors from the seam in its center.
Now, unless I'm misreading this, and this is just how the ship is set up to keep it cold, Usually when you have descriptions in 40K that involve hoarfrost, or I guess as he's saying, hoary frost, it's an aspect of psychic usage dropping the temperature on a physical plane, and it's shown by the ice that comes in there. A really good example would be the Astartes animations, which are still on YouTube for now before 40K takes them down eventually. At this point, it might happen. And you just see some of the Marines stepping into it and it cracks when there's psychic usage involved. So whatever they're doing now, this isn't a one-time psychic usage. This isn't just a use at our discretion. It's a always-on psychic power is in play constantly type deal. What are they doing
the ancient credo depicted there with white, fur-like ice, before it was split in half by the opening of the passage beyond. He nearly spoke the words aloud, agreeing with the ancient sentiment, even as he resented the double meaning he always found there.
Oh?
The old words upon the doors read, "Knowledge is power. Guard it well."
Oh, jeez. The double meaning being that it is power to use against you as well as to use, and if you don't guard it well, it will be used against you unless you use against someone else. Or reverse that. It's still true. Like that someone actually realizes that. Don't move on. I want to see what goes in there. No, don't move on. Don't move on.
The band played like their lives depended on it, as they did every time. And
really? You're putting up young Boba Fett as an image? Also, they're not doing the meanwhile on somewhere else. They just switched over completely. I wonder if this is when he switched styles of transition. Huh.
Every time, Boba knew
it actually is Boba Fett.
Assume it. The young Fett clone had been grooming and growing his skills since his defeat in the attempted rescue of a Jedi from Count Dooku. Luckily, that client...
Wait, what?
Rescue of a Jedi from Count Dooku. Luckily...
He was hired to rescue a Jedi from Count Dooku? And he took that job? Was not expecting that one, because I thought his entire thing was just hating Force users and Jedi. It's probably something that happened in Clone Wars I just haven't gotten to yet. Things need to get around to.
That client had paid in advance, and it had not taken him long to bounce back. Even now, he was admiring his recently repaired armor and newly integrated weaponry. It would be years yet before...
What is that music playing in the background? Is that actually the Cantina song from Star Wars or something else? Just a similar bouncy tune. I know, that's what I'm focusing on. It's just, it sounds so similar, and I know I've heard it somewhere, but I'm pulling a massive blank on that.
Before he grew large enough to truly inherit his father's Beskar. But until then, Jabba's credits and the equipment they made available for him
we're on Tatooine because you mentioned Jabba?
Buffer. The slug and his pale, tentacle-headed attendant had started to take a liking to Fett and his crew of hunters, though this time he found himself languishing alone. Sitting within a booth near the wall, he felt the empty spaces where Dengar, Bosk, and the others would linger, though their absence was not necessarily an unwelcome sensation. The others had been busy spending their credits on personal vacations, personal matters, or had, like himself, decided to take time off in the form of a few private jobs. He had no idea.
So his time off was working. I don't know Boba Fett's character. I barely know him because there's a lot of media about him, but the things I've interacted with on were in the movies, which were very minor roles when you really come down to it. He was in the second and third original trilogy and didn't really actually play much a point beyond his I have got Han Solo. I am now dead in the second movie, or well, I guess third movie, in his second appearance. And then as a little baby boy who pops up and, you know, is in Attack of the Clones and is just not there after that, because just being there was the important part. All the surrounding media, the Book of Boba Fett, I haven't seen anything about him during Rebels or Clone Wars, so I don't know what his entire goal or his personality is really like, other than hating Jedi. So the fact that Fan is saying that his time off is doing a personal job is giving me the workaholic vibe. That and the little kid looking extra grim. Yeah, it gives me a lot of information on his character, at least how Fan's going to treat him. Really nice. I like that just because a lot of people would come here with extra information that I don't have. So I'm picking that up now just from how it's being described in a few sentences. Nice of the fan to do that. Whether that was intentional or not, I would probably say so, but only because fan likes to give a lot of information about his characters. Although he has mentioned in the previous Aftertalk that he does feel more constrained with canon characters like this because they actually have certain ways they have to act. Otherwise, it feels wrong. Unlike his own OCs, like most of the 40K side, where he's allowed to make them as crazed or as sympathetic as he wants, and he's also allowed to kill them off at moments of great intensity if he needs to. There's just more room to actually write there.
Idea how theirs had fared, but the Fett was now sitting on a tidy pile of funds that no one had to know too much about, in addition to his new equipment. He wasn't much for Jabba's frequent parties, but he also recognized that just by attending them, he'd single himself out in the slug's mind. And that was just as much a part of the job as anything else.
Yeah.
He was polishing his left gauntlet, rubbing a fine cloth across the durasteel which protected his knuckles when he felt
It's PR. Oh, God.
a sudden chill. He was quite attuned to it by now, the soft call of his instincts, and in the constant heat of Tatooine, it was even easier to notice than usual. He felt
not force
hairs
sensitivity at all.
lifting around his body, meeting the inside of his suit, his every silent cell beginning to scream a warning.
Now that is a very interesting way to describe that. Because in Star Wars, two things that come to mind are, one, Mandalorians don't touch the Force. Depending on which author and which writers are doing it, it's either because they are just too focused on themselves to become Jedi, but the Force is an option, or the Force is never an option, so they can never become Jedi. I've seen it both ways, and in various books, novels, TV shows, it's been described in conflicting ways, and it really just depends on who's touching it at the moment. This, though, considering the 40K aspects and how fans making a lot of conversions to that, if he's still going with the Mandalorians don't touch the Force, but this sounds very much Force related, you can then just change that out. What is the opposite of a Force user here? It almost seems like a minor null, but that doesn't really fit with Boba Fett's characterization. I don't think they would attribute that to him. So maybe minor Force sensitive that's untrained as well? I don't know, but it definitely seems more like that. Just that intentional highlighting of all the physiological reactions. It sounds supernatural. It sounds warp related. I actually have no idea how Fan is going to play this one.
Danger was approaching. He took his helmet off the table in front of him and slid it on, activating his seals and running a quick check on his weapons, both the holstered ones and integrated units. It was as he concluded this that he heard the first signs of it, a rumble, and then what sounded like muffled clapping.
Muffled clapping? Also, wasn't Tatooine the place where a lot of the civilians from the Empire were dropped off, or was it a different planet? I honestly just do not remember. It was probably mentioned. I'm just completely blanking right now because we've been on Axum so long and my memory shit as it is.
Though he was not the only one to hear the sudden and evidently approaching ruckus, the band refused to stop playing until Bib Fortuna began to frantically wave a clawed hand in their direction. The music died, and the many associates, enforcers, dancers, hunters, slaves, smugglers, and assorted scum who filled the main room hushed their conversations, laughter, and debates, listening as one. What had at first sounded like claps and thumps were now recognizable as the throaty blasts of some kind of weapon. Gamorrean guards shuffled from the room, pushing out the door in a mob of eager, grunting muscle and fat. Soon their squeals and screams joined the distant noise, but not for long. Bellowed the hut in the center of...
Oh, did Fan actually look up Huttese to say that?
For long.
Oh yeah, he actually looked up Huttese, how to spell that. Not bad. I mean, way more effort than you ever need to put into that, but some people like the authenticity of actually knowing the fantasy languages. I am not one because I hate translations and things. It's used interesting sometimes and I appreciate it, but it's just not my personal forte. Impressive, though.
Bellowed the hut in the center of the room.
Probo Jabba Ubufugi.
Bib snapped out right afterward. Most of the armed men inside rose to the call, and Boba would have followed as well were it not for the fact that he hadn't heard any promise or credits along with that command. Fett knew Hutts well enough to know better than to expect unpromised recompense from them.
Yeah.
So as the other bounty hunters formed a wall of blasters and blades between the entryway and their slimy master, Boba instead lowered himself under the table of his booth and took a knee.
I mean, smart, but it's just weird hearing any image of Boba hiding under a table, even if it's to get a better position. Just never really what I thought. On the other hand, this is a much younger Boba who's probably smaller, at least if we go by the image used here. I don't know how old he would be in this time in the Clone Wars. I legitimately cannot place the numbers in my head, so partially that's because I haven't watched the show and I need to catch up on it, and partially because I don't do numbers. Okay, mostly because of the second one, but I'm going to pretend the first one has an impact too, because it sounds less embarrassing to me in my head, even if it really isn't.
Waiting. He didn't need to wait long. The shadows of massive figures loomed in the late sun's light, painting the pale bend into the room black for a few meager moments. Large, round shoulder pads struck the side of a set of Junker's chimes. Jabba's men cried out as one and opened fire,
or something else.
Fire answered them in turn. A plume of billowing, roaring hell met the uneven wall of bodies.
Ooh, they got flamers.
Blaster fire was sent into the flames, but the towering figure behind them did not so much as flinch or falter as he was struck.
I don't know why, but for some reason, as soon as they said round shoulder pads, I know it's probably a Space Marine. It just feels weird that they would drop a Space Marine in here already, though, because Fenn has been building up the base level fighting so much and just building up the Imperial side, introducing the armies, introducing the psychic aspects, introducing some high-end fights, but only on a singular basis. Having a Marine just introduced like this would be weird. And granted, when the Chapter Master fought, it was more of an exhibition match against enemies so far below them that they had fun. It was never the big showpiece fight. It probably isn't a Marine for that reason alone, because I don't think Fenn would just jump ahead with all the buildup. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I almost think it was maybe a robot from the Mechanicus before that.
The weapon cut out, but the flames clung to the men they touched. Roars of battle morphing into screams of hellish pain as the invading warriors entered, 5 in total. Dressed in mechanized suits of green armor, which was heavily caked in alien livery and symbols, they entered.
Okay, so apparently it was Space Marines, and part of the Salamanders? Because I don't think they have many side chapters. I mean, canonically, there's only a handful, I think, because they were decimated number-wise. But again, it's your personal take. You can do whatever you want.
Entered without hesitation, silencing the roasting men with downward stomps of their roboticized feet. While one of them was clearly armed with some kind of massive flamethrower, the other 3 had smaller, slug-throwing weapons in its place. Weapons they aimed out at the others in the room, Boba included. Cursing, but knowing a lost cause when he saw one, Boba lowered the 2 blasters he'd drawn, placing them down on the ground and raising his arms.
Oh.
The others in the room...
You know, any other chapter, no matter how nice they are, surrendering to a Space Marine is usually a good way to just be dead faster. And you know, it's 40K. That actually might be the nicest option. Depending how deviant or not deviant a Space Marine chapter, probably based on the Salamanders is, they might actually accept that. I don't know.
Slowly followed suit, speeding up when 2 of the warriors discharged their weapons, turning a couple of would-be heroes into smears against the wall.
They will be heroes.
Bib Fortuna kneeled on the ground beside Jabba, hands raised in trembling supplication, while his master, clearly flushed with fear, maintained a more dignified posture.
I'm sorry. The idea of Jabba flushed with fear actually just makes me smile. Something about Hutts getting fucked over. I just like it. It's nice.
Ubata kono ingo mapinki dunko ikavis. Ji amata grancha Jabata hat. Ma frinki arganono artan lawik. On ve revini chos chowang vi.
Jabba demanded, though whoever these men were, they seemed unimpressed to the point of ignoring him.
Yeah, I mean, he's
An
literally a giant
uncommon
slug.
sight. Having subdued the room, the
He's
four
probably the least
maintained
interesting
their
thing there.
guarding positions, weapons leveled, saying nothing, and waiting. Soon enough, the sound of many booted footsteps could be heard echoing down towards them, drawing closer and closer.
And again, I mentioned it was kind of weird he's bringing in Space Marines, but they're not really fighting all out. They're just immediately overwhelming them, and Fan isn't focusing on the fighting themselves, other than Flamers are terrifying up close against mercenaries who don't actually have the advantage of, well, the drop, which is how they usually fight. I'm still a little surprised that this is the first main action that we're seeing Space Marines fight in as a unit rather than a Space Marine librarian. On the other hand, we've seen the Space Marine, I can't speak today, the librarian fight already, and that was a set piece. And it's not even finished, but it was massive and overwhelming and saw them tearing through Jedi. So we know that level of power is up there. I'm just kind of surprised that the first time we see even a unit, it's just against people who don't have a chance. Whatever. I guess partially, if they had gone more onto how every single piece was fighting, it would feel a lot more off-putting because it doesn't feel like a major fight. In the same way, when the chapter master was fighting against the droids, it was just him having fun. It didn't feel like an actual fight. A little odd, though. Fan's been building them up so much. It's kind of weird that they're jumping ahead, like especially since the introduction of the legions. Were they legions? The Imperial Army. I keep wanting to say legions for some reason. I'm just going to say fucking and say it anyways. Those units that were from Death World, that admittedly were really fascinating in the backstory he gave them, and how they were intense and dark and terrifying. And then we're moving on to Space Marines, who are admittedly going to kick their ass if they fought. I mean, if they go lore rather than tabletop-wise, but details. It's just weird that he's moving this way.
Men and women in bright green and white uniforms stormed inside, moving around the larger warriors that had come before them, half setting up to support them, while the other half created a small cordon and saluted. Boba heard one final set of footfalls approaching, and watched on as an old man entered the main room and strode between the assembled and saluting officers, waving them to ease as he...
And again, if it was anyone other than the Salamanders or something based around the Salamanders, that probably wouldn't be what they do, because Space Marines don't like taking orders from mortals. And sometimes they will put it exactly like that, I mean, ignoring the fact that they are also mortal, because they die just like everyone else. Hell, considering the Lion got old, there's even arguments to show that they're mortal as well, just given time. A lot of time. Other than, a certain Primarch who won't die, but details aside.
He did. He leaned on a cane, a toothed sword of some kind, which he seemed to be using to support himself, though the Fett was uncertain if this was a sign of true impairment or an affect, for the man was huge. Not as large as the armored warriors that had breached the palace, but he was certainly the largest old man Boba had ever seen. He wore a tall red hat, and his matching coat was so heavy with medals, seals, and ornaments that they may have served as effective battle armor.
A general?
And it was not just the symbols that impressed upon the clone that this man was of a respected station. The way his men watched him as he passed, the pride which emanated from them at his mere glance, these subtle signs spoke twice as loudly as the motley of medals the old man wore on his chest. His face was a history of lines and scars, and yet he wore an easy smile.
Oh, that's why he introduced Space Marines. I was kind of wondering, because we've been building up the Space Marines as the big fight, but here he's using the Space Marines to build up the general. Because if it was just random people walking in and seeing a guy in a puffed up suit, it'd be like, okay, we have that kind of puffed up asshole in the Imperium army. Because that's the thing that happens, someone who's over promoted and drapes themselves in finery. But if you change that and show that Space Marines are working with him and they're being respectful enough to do what he says, and he's also not wasting it, he's not being shown to be incompetent, but being shown to be in control and only coming in after everything's done, it's building him up as someone more competent who you should pay attention to. So their inclusion isn't actually to show the competence of Space Marines or to show the power of Space Marines. It's to lend that competence and that power that's been built up to this character to give him more definition. Okay, see, that makes a lot more sense now. That's why they're included.
Even as he carefully picked his way over and around the smeared and charred corpses which lay in his path. The man came to stand
Not fretting
before
over it,
Jabba
not commenting
and gave the
on it being
barest
dirty.
incline of his head.
Good.
One of the larger warriors, the one who carried the flamethrower, left his position and came to stand beside the man, who then began to speak. His language was alien, but was...
And that is a level of respect, both acknowledging them by the general, and then not the general going to them, but the salamander, probably the either... I don't know what position. It's probably the sergeant coming over to the general. That is a respect. That is a mark of not just respect, but authority by the general that they would deign to do that. It's really building him up. And every little bit here shows that he's also not abusing it. So he's probably being set up as a very important player.
Was promptly translated by the hulking soldier beside him.
Oh.
Boba Fett listened closely then as the
translated
red
for them.
old man introduced himself.
Forbida to suva introdu majesty. Ujiji ava urginki niba of...
Really, fan? You talk about incomprehensible language, and you translate into Huddies, which I guess makes sense, but at the same time, you're talking about a translation from what would have been English into something that's not English, so we'll have to then have it translated back into Basic, which would be English to us. The layers of translation just to account for the various BSery here. It makes sense, but you also, this is one of the times where you could get away with just putting in common. Or, well, I guess basic or whatever it is that's basically English in space. And just save the translation. Not bad, but...
replicati of ta imperium du mankind. An ara nuba arigava ta vis planitu. Jivudu aprisha if uba gold anva...
He went all out on this.
Translated the warrior. Jabba did not respond right away, sizing the man up, and then the men around them, before finally giving his answer.
Jabba's going to be stupid because... Hutt pride, I'm assuming. Just going to call that now. I don't even need to know a bit of what the translation was. It's something along the lines of, this is our planet now. Fuck you.
If dawaga ala du uba nibad, uba shuva ava judas bakaji.
And this is grandstanding, saying it's probably his. I don't speak Huddies. Some people probably did learn it. I'm not one of them.
Mukajiji kulva choba e opa ofo. Asvadu questi. Jil angvag uba. Anten. Gigi kaga deswi mogo. Mukakavo matari. Dovangi visplika uba maf.
Fan, I appreciate what you're doing. I like that you're going into the detail of using the language that you probably looked this up. But from an outside perspective, that is a level of obsession with lore-accurate information that I appreciate, I respect. I just wish you didn't have it. It's probably the only time you're going to hear me say that because you're doing it right objectively, but this is just a whole string of dialogue that means nothing other than give you the basic hints of what they're saying, which is entirely possible because you can figure out what role it's coming from. But at the same time... It's empty air. It's empty page if it's seeing a written format. I personally don't like it because it feels like a break in the story because I don't know what's being said and I'm just filling in gaps based on I know who's saying what. It's done well. It's something some people really love. And more diehard fans are probably going like, this is great. And you know what? I can get that. It's something that makes sense if you're just loving someone getting into the lore of doing it. It's like going into Tolkien and seeing Elfish to have the dwarves and the languages of Mordor and all those aspects in there. That's something people geek out over. And you know, it's fine. It's great. I'm not even saying this is a bad thing. Just personally, I don't because it feels like dead air. It feels like there's a lot of thought put into something that we're not going to get. And at best, we'll just get a translation unless we look it up ourselves. And that translation would probably abbreviate because it would just be restating what you already said technically. Or we could just cut to that and then move on immediately. This is just my impersonal take on writing when you go into large dialogue sections. Or if you have an initial sentence and then you just say a translation following after and just summarizing it to make it easier for the reader. I know some people don't like it that way, and I get why they don't, because they like the authenticity of it. It's just a personal choice here. It's just not mine.
Boba was both impressed and amused.
See?
Clearly,
we're just restating
Jabba
everything
had
that was just
no
written.
choice, even if he insisted on acting as though he did. The invader in red did not seem perturbed by this, though. More than happy to continue in that tone, so long as it got him what he wanted.
Yeah.
Boba leaned in slightly.
Also, that makes him by far the most level-headed person in the Imperium ever, who's either a commissar or a general. Could go either way. Unless they actually dropped in Ciaphas Cain. I have no idea if he's even alive at this time, because I don't actually know what years he's active through. And that would be a big drop right now to just have some main character dropped in there. And I really would doubt that's how that would go. It's just the picture made me think of that for some reason.
Attentive, making certain to memorize his name now that Jabba had asked for it.
Manara sa Caiaphas Cain. Anji Amnawa as du hero of
Are you serious? You actually dropped Ciaphas Cain into this. You just... Okay. That's a thing. Oh. I didn't think this was possible because he's such a well-established, well-known character that you have so much information you need to have in advance for this. I didn't think he would touch that because there are so many pitfalls to a joke story, lighthearted character because his entire premise is amusing. He has the more lighthearted stories, not the context, not what he's talking about, not what he's dealing with, but the fact that his internal monologue versus what he's actually doing and that disconnect is fun, which is something 40K almost never has anywhere else I can think about, makes him such, honestly, admittedly, an immediate gateway character to 40K. And frankly, he probably should be the poster boy of the franchise because he gives you that relatable character you want to get to know. You want to know more about him. But he also has his flaws, which are also part of what makes him appealing. And he's such a good character. And I can't believe Fan is taking the risk of putting in what is essentially a comedic character into a serious setting outside of the comedic character's presence in a story that is not comedic. This is not being played off for laugh. This is being played off for what the fuck is going to happen next. I don't know. Oh my God. The balls on Fan to drop this one in. Like, I'm talking grenades right now, man. They're about to implode. This is a mixed metaphor. I have no idea where I'm going with this one, but dear God, he actually dropped Ciaphas Cain in here. Did I just misread that? No. Ciaphas Cain, he actually hero of the Imperium.
Caiaphas Cain. Anji Amnawa as du hero of ta Imperium,
said the translator.
And they even dropped the music. So there's a lot of things I expected. And as you can probably guess, Ciaphas Cain was not one of them. I was just going, okay, it's a well-respected general who's actually willing to talk. Nah, maybe it's a commissar. It could be because Ciaphas Cain. I saw the picture. It's like, kind of looks like Cain. Some of the artistic impressions I've seen of him. Or it could just be a random commissar who just happens to look like that because he's the most recognizable one. It's probably not. Just, Fan, you son of a bitch. You actually did it. And then because you're aware of his comedic character, as soon as you introduce him, you have the joke song in the background going with that. And just fades to dark. You just hear that few extra seconds of Ciaphas Cain, hero of the Imperium. In the previous after talks, when you talked about how there's so many characters you can't bring in because they break the setting and would make it too easy to win, I was like, yeah, that's most of the named characters. There's very few. And what are the chances you bring in the ones who are more comedic because that doesn't fit the tone? Apparently, you thought of that and you're doing it on Tatooine as Ciaphas Cain's playground. Oh, this is going to be completely different than any other setting, and I don't exactly know which way he's going to go with this one, but I really want to find out. Basically what I'm saying is, if you haven't already, there's a link below to the original video. Hit it up. I need to just go laugh this out right now. Oh, that was beautiful, man. I'll see you guys in the next one. Adios.